Good day. This lecture delves into a cornerstone principle of the Philippine judicial system, the doctrine of stare decisis. We will explore its meaning, its foundation within Philippine law, how it operates through our court hierarchy, the circumstances under which established precedents may be revisited, and its overall significance and challenges. Understanding stare decisis is crucial not only for legal practitioners and students, but for anyone seeking to comprehend how law develops and maintains stability and predictability in the Philippines. It touches upon fundamental aspects of judicial power, legal certainty, and the rule of law itself. It is a principle that shapes how rights are determined, how obligations are enforced, and how the legal landscape evolves over time. The doctrine of stare decisis is encapsulated in the Latin maxim stare decisis et non quieta movere. This phrase translates to stand by things decided and not disturb the calm, or settled points. It is fundamentally the doctrine of precedent, forming a bedrock principle in legal systems influenced by the common law tradition. At its heart, stare decisis is a judicial policy or doctrine obligating courts to follow the principles, rules, or standards established in prior judicial decisions when deciding subsequent cases with similar or closely related facts or legal issues. The essence is that once a point of law has been solemnly examined, considered, and settled by a competent court, it should generally be regarded as close to further examination or relitigation by the same tribunal or by lower courts that are bound to follow its adjudications. This adherence applies particularly to the ratio decidendi, or the core reasoning of the prior decision. The doctrine serves several critical functions within a legal system. 1. Consistency and stability. The American Supreme Court defined the justification for stare decisis in the 2015 case of Kimball versus Marvel Enterprises as promoting the even-handed, predictable, and consistent development of legal principles, fostering reliance on judicial decisions, and contributing to the actual and perceived integrity of the judicial process. This ensures that the law does not shift arbitrarily or depend merely on the identity of the judge assigned to a case. It provides a stable foundation upon which legal rights and obligations can be understood and applied. 2. Predictability. By adhering to past rulings, stare decisis allows individuals, businesses, legal professionals, and the government to anticipate legal outcomes with greater certainty. This predictability is essential for planning personal and professional interactions and making informed decisions based on established legal rules. 3. Fairness and equality. A core tenet of justice is that like cases ought to be decided alike. Stare decisis promotes this by requiring consistent application of legal principles, thereby fostering equal protection under the law, regardless of the specific parties involved. 4th, judicial efficiency economy. Following precedent saves valuable judicial time and resources. Courts do not need to reinvent the wheel by reanalyzing and relitigating legal issues that have already been definitively settled. This allows the judiciary to focus its efforts on unresolved or novel legal questions. 5. Legitimacy and integrity. Adherence to precedent fosters public reliance on judicial decisions and contributes significantly to the actual and perceived integrity of the judicial process. It helps ensure that judicial decisions are grounded in established legal principles rather than arbitrary discretion or personal bias. The purposes served by stare decisis: consistency, predictability, fairness, efficiency, and legitimacy are not merely incidental benefits. They are fundamental to the effective functioning of the legal system and the maintenance of the rule of law. The doctrine provides an essential framework that allows law to operate as a reliable guide for societal conduct and dispute resolution. Its foundational nature underscores why departures from precedent are typically approached with caution and require significant justification. While originating in common law systems, the doctrine of stare decisis finds explicit and firm grounding within the Philippine legal framework, primarily through statute and supported by constitutional structure. The cornerstone of stare decisis in the Philippines is Article 8 of the Civil Code, Republic Act Number 386. This provision unequivocally states, judicial decisions applying or interpreting the laws or the Constitution shall form part of the legal system of the Philippines. This article effectively codifies the doctrine of precedent into Philippine law. It is the primary legal basis that grants decisions of the Supreme Court, particularly those interpreting the Constitution and statutes, their binding precedential weight. By incorporating these judicial decisions into the formal legal system, Article 8 ensures their authority and necessitates their observance by lower courts and legal practitioners. The 1987 Philippine Constitution further reinforces the application of stare decisis through its structuring of the judiciary and specific provisions regarding judicial decisions. First, judicial hierarchy. Article 8, Section 1 vests judicial power in one Supreme Court and in such lower courts as may be established by law. The creation of this hierarchical structure, with the Supreme Court at the apex, inherently supports the principle of vertical stare decisis. For the judicial system to function coherently, the interpretations of the highest court must necessarily bind all subordinate courts to ensure uniform application of the law across the nation. Second, stability of doctrine. Article 8, Section 4, Paragraph 3 provides a crucial safeguard for established jurisprudence. No doctrine or principle of law laid down by the court in a decision rendered en banc or in division may be modified or reversed except by the court sitting en banc. This provision directly addresses the modification or reversal of precedent, reinforcing the stability and authority of doctrines laid down by the Supreme Court and specifying the mechanism required for any such change. It is important to understand the precise status of judicial decisions within the Philippine legal landscape. While the Philippines operates under a civil law tradition where statutes enacted by the legislature are the primary source of law, Article 8 elevates judicial decisions, specifically those applying or interpreting the law or constitution, to become an integral part of the legal system. Although these decisions are not laws in the same sense as statutes passed by Congress, they are considered authoritative evidence of what the laws mean. The interpretation placed upon a law by the Supreme Court is held to constitute part of the law as of the date the law was originally passed, effectively establishing the contemporaneous legislative intent, legis interpretatio, legis vim obtinet. The interpretation placed upon the written law by a competent court has the force of law. This gives judicial decisions, particularly those emanating from the Supreme Court, an important function in clarifying, expounding, and shaping the application of the law. The explicit adoption of stare decisis through Article 8 represents a significant feature of the Philippine legal system, bridging the civil law emphasis on codified statutes with the common law reliance on judicial precedent. This integration gives jurisprudence a uniquely powerful and formal role, potentially exceeding its status in some other civil law jurisdictions. Article 8 does not merely permit courts to consider past rulings. Its imperative language mandates that Supreme Court interpretations become integral components of Philippine law. This imposes a clear duty on lower courts to recognize, understand, and apply this jurisprudence as binding law, not just as persuasive commentary. The Supreme Court of the Philippines stands at the pinnacle of the nation's judicial hierarchy. As the court of last resort, its decisions are final and cannot be appealed to any higher tribunal. It serves as the ultimate arbiter of legal questions and controversies involving rights that are legally demandable and enforceable. By virtue of Article 8 of the Civil Code, decisions of the Supreme Court that apply or interpret the Constitution or the laws become part of the law of the land. These rulings, collectively known as jurisprudence, constitute binding precedents that all lower courts, from the Court of Appeals down to the municipal trial courts, are obligated to follow. It is crucial to note that only decisions emanating from the Supreme Court establish binding precedent within the Philippine judicial system, while decisions of lower appellate courts like the Court of Appeals may hold persuasive value. They do not bind co-equal courts or the Supreme Court itself. Within a Supreme Court decision, not every statement carries the weight of binding precedent. A critical distinction is made between the ratio decidendi and obiter dictum. 1. Ratio decidendi. This Latin term translates to the reason for the decision. It refers to the essential legal principle, rule, or reasoning upon which the court's judgment is based, and which is necessary for the resolution of the legal issue presented in the case. The ratio decidendi is the core element of a decision that constitutes binding precedent and must be followed by lower courts in subsequent similar cases. Identifying the precise ratio decidendi can sometimes be challenging, particularly in cases with multiple opinions or complex reasoning. 2. Obiter dictum. This term means something said by the way, or an incidental remark. Obiter dicta are statements, observations, opinions, or comments made by the court that are not essential to the determination of the case at hand. They might involve hypothetical scenarios, discussions of related but distinct legal points, or broader reflections on the law. While obiter dicta are not binding precedent, they can be considered persuasive authority and may offer valuable insights into the court's thinking or potential future directions in the law. The Supreme Court operates both en banc, or as a full court with all 15 justices, and in divisions, typically of 3, 5, or 7 members. Both en banc and division decisions, when applying or interpreting the law or the Constitution, form part of the legal system under Article 8 and are binding on all lower courts. A decision rendered by a division is not considered inferior to an en banc decision in terms of its binding effect on subordinate courts. However, there is a hierarchy of authority between en banc and division rulings. En banc decisions generally carry greater weight, particularly when addressing significant constitutional questions, novel issues of law, or when modifying or reversing established doctrines. If a conflict arises between a doctrine laid down by one division and a doctrine established by another division or by the en banc court, the en banc pronouncement prevails. Furthermore, as mandated by the Constitution, only the court sitting en banc can modify or reverse a previously established doctrine, whether that doctrine originated from an en banc or a division decision. The combination of Article 8 and the Supreme Court's position as the final arbiter grants the court significant power to shape the legal landscape through its interpretations. These interpretations effectively become binding rules for application purposes, underscoring the judiciary's vital role in defining the practical meaning of laws. While the distinction between the binding ratio decidendi and non-binding obiter dictum is clear conceptually, its practical application presents a challenge. Lower courts and legal practitioners must engage in careful analysis to discern the essential reasoning of a Supreme Court decision, especially in complex cases. Difficulty in definitively identifying the ratio decidendi could potentially lead to inconsistent applications, subtly undermining the predictability that stare decisis aims to achieve. The doctrine of stare decisis operates primarily through the established hierarchy of the Philippine courts. First, vertical stare decisis. The dominant application of stare decisis in the Philippines is vertical. This principle dictates that lower courts are strictly bound by the decisions and legal interpretations rendered by higher courts within the same judicial structure. Most significantly, all courts below the Supreme Court must adhere to its rulings. The established judicial hierarchy generally follows this flow. Rulings from the Supreme Court bind the Court of Appeals, the Sandigan Bayan, and the Court of Tax Appeals. Rulings from these appellate courts bind the regional trial courts, and rulings from the regional trial courts bind the first-level courts, namely the metropolitan trial courts, municipal trial courts in cities, municipal trial courts, and municipal circuit trial courts. Sharia courts also operate within a hierarchical structure. The essence is a top down flow of binding legal authority. Trial courts and intermediate appellate courts have a clear obligation to apply the legal doctrines, principles, and interpretations laid down by the Supreme Court when deciding cases that involve substantially similar factual backgrounds or legal issues. Lower courts cannot disregard, contravene, or refuse to apply established Supreme Court jurisprudence, even if they might personally disagree with the reasoning. Their duty is to apply the law as interpreted by the highest court of the land. The obligation to follow higher court precedent is not merely suggestive, it carries consequences. A lower court's failure or refusal to adhere to binding Supreme Court precedent constitutes a reversible error and can be a ground for the reversal or modification of its decision upon appeal. Furthermore, judges who willfully disregard or deliberately refuse to apply established Supreme Court doctrines may potentially face administrative sanctions for misconduct or insubordination. Closely related to the principle of hierarchy and vertical stare decisis is the doctrine of judicial stability, also known as the doctrine of non-interference. This doctrine posits that courts of equal rank should not interfere with each other's orders or judgments, and importantly, that a lower court cannot interfere with, modify, or reverse the orders or decisions of a higher court. This principle reinforces the hierarchical structure and ensures the orderly administration of justice by preventing conflicting rulings and maintaining respect among courts. It complements stare decisis by ensuring that the binding precedents set by higher courts are not undermined by lower courts attempting to relitigate or overturn them. Vertical stare decisis, therefore, functions as the practical enforcement mechanism, ensuring that the Supreme Court's interpretations achieve uniform application throughout the Philippine archipelago. It is a vital tool for maintaining judicial control, coherence, and consistency across numerous lower courts, preventing a fragmented legal system where the same law could be interpreted differently in various jurisdictions. However, while providing essential guidance, the doctrine also places a considerable burden on lower court judges. They must continuously stay abreast of the vast and ever-growing body of Supreme Court jurisprudence, meticulously research relevant precedents, and accurately identify the applicable ratio decidendi for each case they handle. This adds a layer of complexity and demands significant diligence in their decision-making process to ensure compliance with the principle of stare decisis. While adherence to precedent is fundamental, the doctrine of stare decisis is not absolute, particularly concerning the Supreme Court's relationship with its own prior rulings. 2. Horizontal stare decisis. This aspect of the doctrine refers to the principle that a court, especially an appellate court like the Supreme Court, adheres to its own previous decisions. While the Supreme Court generally respects and follows its own precedents, this adherence is considered the principle of policy rather than an inexorable command. The court retains the authority to depart from its prior rulings under appropriate circumstances. The Supreme Court of the Philippines possesses the inherent authority to revisit, reconsider, modify, or even completely reverse its own prior decisions or established doctrines. This power allows the court to correct past errors, adapt the law to changing societal conditions, or refine legal principles over time. A critical procedural safeguard governs the exercise of this power. Article 8, Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the 1987 Constitution explicitly mandates that any modification or reversal of a doctrine or principle of law previously laid down by the Supreme Court, regardless of whether the original ruling came from the court en banc or a division, must be decided by the Supreme Court sitting en banc. This means a division of the court does not have the authority to overturn a doctrine established by the full court or even a doctrine previously established by another division. Such power is reserved exclusively for the collective wisdom of the court en banc. This requirement serves as a significant institutional check, promoting stability by ensuring that fundamental changes to jurisprudence are made only after deliberation by the entire court, or at least a majority thereof. It centralizes the authority to alter established legal principles, inherently making the process more considered and less prone to frequent shifts compared to allowing smaller panels to overturn precedents. Departure from precedent is not undertaken lightly and requires substantial justification. While specific formulations may vary, courts generally consider several factors when deciding whether to overturn a prior ruling. 1. Strong and compelling reasons. Philippine jurisprudence consistently emphasizes that abandoning precedent necessitates strong and compelling reasons, reflecting a high threshold for departure. This underscores the default preference for stability. 2. Erroneous or unjust. Precedent. If a prior decision is demonstrably incorrect, based on a flawed understanding or misapplication of the law, or leads to unjust or absurd results in its operation, it may be overruled. Early commentators like Blackstone acknowledged that precedents could be disregarded if flatly absurd or unjust. 3. Unworkable or badly reasoned. A precedent may be overturned if its established rule or standard proves impractical or difficult for lower courts to apply consistently, or if the reasoning underpinning the decision is fundamentally flawed. 4th, conflict with Constitution or fundamental principles. If a precedent is found to perpetuate an unconstitutional holding or conflicts with overriding constitutional principles or subsequent legislation, it may be abandoned. The 2015 case of Morales versus Court of Appeals, which abandoned the condonation doctrine due to its perceived conflict with the constitutional principle of public trust, exemplifies this. 5. Changed conditions. Significant societal, economic, technological, or factual changes occurring after the precedent was established may render the original ruling outdated or inappropriate for current circumstances. The law must retain the capacity to evolve and adapt to new realities and changing social or political understandings. 6. Reliance interests. Courts weigh whether overruling a precedent would unfairly prejudice individuals, institutions, or society as a whole who have reasonably relied on the established rule in ordering their affairs. Significant reliance interests can argue in favor of retaining even a flawed precedent, though this factor is balanced against others. 7th, constitutional versus statutory stare decisis. Courts often exercise greater flexibility when reconsidering precedents involving constitutional interpretation compared to those interpreting statutes. The rationale is that errors in constitutional interpretation are significantly harder to correct through the political process than errors in statutory interpretation, which Congress can rectify through legislation. When the Supreme Court does decide to overturn a precedent, it faces the question of whether the new doctrine should apply retroactively or prospectively. While the general principle is that judicial interpretations form part of the law from the date of its enactment, the court recognizes exceptions. It may choose to apply a new doctrine prospectively, particularly when retroactive application would impose undue hardship, impair vested rights, or cause significant injustice to parties who had acted in good faith reliance on the old, now overturned rule. The power to overturn precedent, guided by these justifications and procedural requirements, demonstrates that stare decisis facilitates rather than prohibits the evolution of law through judicial means. It allows for correction and adaptation, ensuring that jurisprudence remains relevant and just over time, albeit through a cautious and deliberative process anchored by the need for stability. The en banc requirement, however, introduces a potential complexity. While division rulings bind lower courts immediately, doctrinal coherence ultimately relies on the en banc court, especially if different divisions reach conflicting interpretations on emerging issues before the full court has occasion to consolidate or clarify the governing principle. This underscores the en banc's critical role in maintaining the ultimate unity of Philippine jurisprudence. Stare decisis remains a fundamental and indispensable doctrine within the Philippine legal landscape. It provides the necessary stability and predictability that underpin the rule of law, allowing individuals and institutions to rely on established legal interpretations and ensuring a degree of uniformity and order in judicial decision making across the nation. The application of stare decisis in the Philippines embodies a continuous and delicate balancing act. It navigates the inherent tension between the compelling need for legal stability and consistency on the one hand, and the equally important need for the law to remain just, relevant, and capable of evolution in response to changing circumstances and societal values on the other. The Philippine legal system, through its constitutional provisions like Article 8, Section 4, Paragraph 3, and the statutory mandate of Article 8 of the Civil Code, provides the framework for managing this dynamic interplay between adherence to precedent and the capacity for judicial adaptation. The continued effective functioning of this doctrine relies heavily on the careful judgment and institutional integrity of the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, as it stewards the development of Philippine jurisprudence. Thank you.